Kia ora everybody, good morning. Labor's the party that believes that hard work should get you somewhere. If you work hard, have a go and do your bit, you should be able to get ahead and build a decent life for yourselves and for your families. But for far too many New Zealanders, that's not the case right at the moment. Too many Kiwis are working hard and going backwards. National promised to fix the economy and get New Zealand back on track. They've delivered the opposite. Unemployment is now at an 11-year high. Youth unemployment is at a 30-year high. Small businesses are under enormous pressure. Public services are being cut. As for Nicola Willis's own fiscal rules, debt is higher, surplus pushed further away. They promised to get New Zealand back on track. Instead, too many New Zealanders are working hard just to stand still. National's answer to their own economic mismanagement is to cut, cut, cut. But you can't cut your way to growth. Cuts cost jobs, they weaken services, and they ultimately make the economy smaller. New Zealand deserves better, and that's why Labour has a different plan. Our focus is on more and better jobs, affordable healthcare, and lower household bills. So today we're setting out our objectives for getting the books back into shape. Because the numbers of the government books need to add up, but so too do the numbers of the households sitting around the kitchen table trying to add it up at the end of the day as well. We know how hard Kiwis work for every dollar that they earn. That's why we're committed to being responsible with their money and ambitious for New Zealand's future. Spending smarter, investing where it pays off, backing the people and the businesses doing the work. Labour will invest in what makes our economy stronger. Getting more people in work, higher productivity, growing businesses, and better public services that everybody relies on. Because economic policy should be judged on what it delivers for people. Growth means nothing if Kiwis don't feel it in their pay packet, their household budget, or in their future. Our fiscal strategy is about making sure they do. I'm now going to hand over to our Finance and Economy spokesperson, Barbara Edmonds. She's going to talk into the detail.
Tēnā koutou katoa, thank you, Chris. What Labour has set out today is the economic and fiscal choices at this year's election. My job is to make sure we can deliver that responsibly and make the numbers add up. Our strategy sets out the clear objectives we're committed to get there. First, we'll return the books to surplus by 29/30. We'll use the conventional Obligao measure, not a convenient alternative for creative accounting. Second, we'll bring net debt down over time. Our long-term objective is 20% of GDP. And third, we will keep spending and revenue sustainable. Both will sit at around 33% of GDP once our capital gains tax is fully implemented. But we won't balance the books by shrinking the economy. National has tried it and it hasn't worked. Labour will make every dollar count. We'll invest where it grows the economy, where it lifts productivity, and where it creates good jobs. We'll also bring greater discipline and transparency to government spending by establishing an independent parliamentary budget office. They will be tasked with providing transparent scrutiny of the government's books and election commitments. Labour believes keeping inflation under control matters, but so does keeping people in work. That's why we will restore the Reserve Bank's dual mandate. We will also restore the wellbeing reporting, because the government's books aren't the only measure that matters. Economic decisions should ultimately be judged by what they mean for New Zealanders and New Zealand. Whether there are good jobs, whether public services work, whether families can get ahead. We'll balance the books, we'll bring down debt, and we'll invest in the people and businesses that will get New Zealand growing again. That is Labour's strategy for what comes next. And we're happy to take questions.
On your net debt target, obviously you're including super it was about 21 to 6% in July, so you're already quite close to it. It's already going up a little bit over the forecast period. Would you be comfortable with it going up more before it got down to over time?
So the 20% net debt target is the objective over the longer term. We will set out our debt trajectory as part of our fiscal plan.
How long is the longer term?
So it's clearly around medium to longer term. So again, that's the objective for us to get to. Whether that's over one fiscal period or another forecast period, I'm not going to provide that measure.
Do you think that a return to the dual mandate is too much flip-flopping for the Reserve Bank, because they've gone through a lot in the last 10 years and you've seen inflation go up and down? Is this too much for them?
So the dual mandate was brought in around 2019. It was to recognise the fact that, yes, the Reserve Bank has a critical role to keep inflation within the band, but it also had the dual mandate because employment matters just as much to the economy. So it gives them an additional tool.
But we did see inflation skyrocket.
We also had a global pandemic and supply shocks at the time too.
Would you still see price stability as being the number one goal? Or
It is critical. It is critical.
That's not asking the question. Is it the number one goal, or is it co-equal with employment?
So the Reserve Bank will make their decision based on the dual mandate, as they've done previously when there was a dual mandate. The important thing for New Zealanders, though, is the transparency and the fact that they'll be able to see the Reserve Bank taking into account the employment levels of the country.
Well, further to Anna's question, though, you're probably speaking more to the kind of ethos of part of your campaign around, not going back and forth between, what Labor wants to do and what the Nats want to do, and just cancelling whatever each other are doing. What's the point of reinstating it when the Nats could potentially come back in and take it away?
Well, I'd note that we would still have the dual mandate if Winston Peters didn't keep flip-flopping in his position. New Zealand First previously supported it when we introduced it. They then voted to take it away. They're now saying that we should bring it back again. The dual mandate is hardly radical. The Australians have one, the Americans have one, many other countries around the world have the same objective.
So on that point though, what about the ongoing differences around Obergau? Because for the general public, it's already probably something that flies over a lot of people's heads. And here, the alternative government and the current government are constantly having an argument about which measure should be used to make the books look better or worse or whatever. So at what point do you just settle on one and actually move on?
So that's always up to the discretion of whoever the finance minister is, as to whatever economic indicators they want to use. Obergau is quite an internationally well-used measure, used by credit reporting agencies, etc., and other governments. We're providing that certainty that we want to keep Obergau and not just make up a new measure to exclude ACC.
Do you accept, though, that it is only adding confusion to the space when you are chopping and changing on a mandate, or chopping and changing on what measure you're using to determine how the books will look? Is that not confusing to the public?
We are providing that certainty today, and Treasury also report on Obergau as well.
At what point do you get in a room, though? At what point do you get in a room with, say, the Nats and say, right, let's pick one, so that you're accusing them of creative counting. It's not just a innocent difference between the two. It's not just picking a different economic indicator. At what point do we go, actually, we need to sort this out? Or do you not think it's important?
Well, the Treasury's recommendation is to stick with the Obergau measure.
On Obergau versus Obergau X, so currently National are targeting Obergau X to get in 1 year earlier than Obergau. You're sticking to the Obergau coming in 39.30. Do you anticipate that you would also get Obergau X that 1 year earlier, or is that goal gone and it's just getting regular Obergau to surplus in 39.30?
Yeah, and Obergau is the measure we're going to be using, and it's at the same trajectory as the current government forecast in BEFU.
So do you expect to get Obergau X to surplus 1 year earlier as well?
It's likely, but we won't require Treasury to report an Obergau X.
Do you concede that budget operating allowances are the key to any future fiscal balances? And if that's the case, what would you see as your budget operating allowances out over the next 3 years?
Thank you, Richard. And that really comes down to our fiscal plan. We will set out operating allowances, debt trajectory. That'll all be part of that fiscal plan because we need to ensure that the policies that we take to the election do add up, and that will happen just after pre-fu this year.
Well, the current budget operating allowances are at 2.4 billion per year. They're pretty tight. You've got some quite ambitious plans here and there. How are you going to make it all add up?
And we will make it all add up, and I can give you that assurance, and we'll set it out as part of the fiscal plan.
Will you need a budget operating allowance that's greater than 2.4 billion to do it?
So at this moment, we need to see where the government books are. A lot has happened since the budget economic fiscal update. It'd be irresponsible of us to set out our fiscal plan before the pre-election fiscal update. So I'm very comfortable with waiting for the pre-election fiscal update to provide that certainty for you.
Just on that, when I spoke to you, I think last week about what you were planning to cut, and you said, wait for pre-fu to outline that. How much do you have in mind about what you want to cut? And just like a ballpark idea.
We're still considering that at the moment. The major thing for me, though, is we have high unemployment. We have 171,000 people out of work. We have people having to take money out of their retirement savings for their everyday living costs. That's not an economy that is working for them. So the choices we will make in the policy settings will be reflected as part of our fiscal plan.
But how does that work? Do you have like a list of things going into pre-fu, thinking this is what? I'm just wondering because this is quite a bit.
Yeah, it's not unusual for political parties to adjust their plans as a result of the pre-election fiscal update.
Going there with an idea of what you want to cut.
Yes, of course, because for example, we've already said that we want to do 3 free GP visits. We want to increase the immediate asset write-off for small businesses. So we do have policies that we've announced that have been costed. And this is why, for example, the Parliamentary Budget Office is going to be a really good tool for future elections so that Kiwis can actually see the transparency, see what does add up, because at the moment it's different.
Sorry, just on the debt trajectory, I know that you said that you don't want to reveal it today because that will be in your fiscal plan, but you have said it at 20%, and so I think the public should have some kind of an idea of where it's going. Like, are we talking about 2035, 2040, 2050? What is the ballpark for that target?
The public expect public services that they can rely on. We will ensure that we are investing in the public services they rely on and ensuring that the spending that we do is smart. So that's why it's part of the longer term objective is to bring it down to 20%.
But that's not answering my question. I've asked for a year. Like, are we talking about in 10 years' time, 15 years, 20 years? Can you provide even just a rough ballpark?
Yeah, and that's why the pre-election fiscal update is really important for us to show our debt trajectory as part of our fiscal plan afterwards. For example, the reason why we want it at 20% is around a prudent level. It allows for buffers for economic shocks. We saw that in previous years when Labor brought back the books into surplus. We had to put the umbrella up when we were faced with a 1 in 100 year pandemic. That's why debt levels can change because of extra conditions that the government has no control over.
Ms. Edmonds, on the revenue, you're looking at getting about 3% higher for net core pound spending and core pound revenue. Is that basically you just feeding in both the cancellation of investment boost and the CGT into the formula, or is there other revenue that we're missing there, perhaps the cancellation of interest liability?
No, so I love the way that you've questioned that, Henry, but ultimately it comes down to we believe around 33% we need to invest in our healthcare system. We know that $1 spent in primary healthcare saves us $10 in the rest of the system. So that's why, for example, the 3 free GPs, the free prescriptions, the free maternity scans, the free cervical screening, that's really important primary healthcare that saves the healthcare system in the longer run.
So sorry, but that's 3% extra. There's essentially 3% extra spending there, which is billions of dollars. But there is obviously billions of dollars in your revenue that you've already announced. Is that the sole thing, or are you leaving room for some other revenue measures?
And we've said 33% of spending based on when the CGT is fully implemented.
Do you think you can get there without any further cuts to the public sector?
I believe that we can get there by ensuring that the public services that New Zealanders rely on are still there for them. For example, I mean, I just saw Chris Hipkins, who made a comment the other day that he is advocating for the loss of a social services organisation within his own electorate. You know, that's not good spending if that's the social services that number of people depend on.
So do you, as the public service stands at the moment in terms of the cuts that have been done, do you think it is a functioning public service given the size that it is at the moment and the money that it receives at the moment? Is it functioning in your mind, or do you need to pump more in? Where is your position on that?
So we do need to invest more in healthcare. For example, you've seen the government finally admit this week that they've only brought on an additional 54 nurses, and yet at the same time we've got emergency department corridors and some of our biggest hospitals absolutely full to capacity by 200%. That's not good investment in the public services that New Zealanders rely on.
Okay, so if you're going to increase the spending there, are you going to do it by cutting services in other areas, or are you going to increase operating allowances and therefore borrow more?
And we'll set that out as part of our fiscal plan. You'll see it all add up, and you'll see the way that the spending is. Because obviously some spending comes in later fiscal years, some start from the very first year that we take into government next year.
This comes down to how Labor fundamentally believes in paying for things, right? And whether you think that the public service can be stripped back any more than it can, and whether you think there needs to be more borrowing in order to invest in more services. I mean, these are simple things that the Labor Party should have a position on. So my question is, do you think that you can make more cuts out of the public service, or do you think you will need to borrow more in order to invest more?
And that's why we're saying 33% of additional, or an additional 3% of spending is the percentage of GDP. Like, it's showing that our expenditure will be a little bit higher because we believe you do need to invest in the healthcare system.
Right, and so the public, so just on the public service bit though, you're not prepared to cut any more out of the public service than it already has been?
I thought I might put that through to the public
look,
services.
we'll set out in our own fiscal plan what we're going to do around the target cuts that the current government have set in their budget. We'll set out our own approach to that in our own fiscal plan. But in terms of questions around, you know, what are we going to do around existing government policy? What are we going to do around existing government debt trajectories? Until the government have released those, which they won't release until the PREFU is released, it's unreasonable to ask us to do that.
No, but can you answer the question though of whether you think that there is anything more that can be cut out of the public service?
We're always going to be looking for efficiencies within the public service, but the government's own numbers, the government's own numbers from the budget don't add up. So if you take Foreign Affairs, for example, at the front end of the budget, they added more staff, hundreds more staff to Foreign Affairs, and at the back end of the budget, they cut hundreds of staff out of Foreign Affairs. Winston Peters has already said that those cuts at the back end of the budget are never going to happen. So their own numbers don't add up. So at the pre-election fiscal update, once that's released, we will then be able to set out our own numbers about how we'll approach that differently.
Sorry, you do. Those cuts are crucial to the surplus track that's in the current forward operating accounts. You're saying you'll get to surplus at the same time. Is that possible without following those public service cuts?
And our fiscal plan will set out the choices that we have to make. One thing I would note is that I understand that CEs were chief executives of government agencies which would have these baseline cuts are meant to provide those to ministers by the end of August. We want to see that information before the election, so we're hoping that the government provides those plans, because otherwise it just seems like it's quite an arbitrary cut.
Public sector salaries are only one part of government spending. Do you see other parts of government spending where you could create greater efficiencies or cuts, or whatever you want to call it?
I think we're always looking for how we can do better with the taxpayer spend that we have every year, and we're going to continue to look for better ways of doing things. There are some changes in the longer term, medium to longer term we're seeing. In education, for example, we have the opposite trajectory to the one we're seeing in aged care, for example. There's actually going to be fewer kids coming through the education system. That's going to open up some choices about what we do there. Every government will face those sorts of choices.
On investment, the current government includes in its forecasts, of course, the prospect of public-private partnerships and private investment going into the projects that are in the infrastructure pipeline. What would you do? What's your way of funding the infrastructure pipeline?
Well, the current government haven't set out how they're going to fund it either, Richard. That is, of course, a subject of considerable debate across the House. What we have said very clearly is we're open to more bipartisan conversations around that. We do need more stability in the infrastructure pipeline, and that includes a more mature conversation about how we fund that over the medium to longer term. recognising that a lot of what's there already, a lot of the projects that the National Party have been announcing around the country, they haven't identified how they're going to pay for them yet.
You keep referring to, wait for the fiscal plan, and it sounds like that's going to contain a lot more information, but it sounds like this strategy sort of hinges on that plan. What was the point in releasing this strategy today?
It's to show what our medium to longer term objectives are. It shows to New Zealanders that we want to put people first. It shows that you can have responsible fiscal management and still think about the well-being of everyday New Zealanders. You can't report what you don't know, so which is why it's incredibly important for us around the well-being measures. What's the point of growth if you have people constantly sleeping in cars, you have 200% homelessness, and you have people having to withdraw from their KiwiSaver just to pay everyday costs?
Have you briefed any ratings agencies on this new strategy, or do you plan to in the near future?
So we speak I speak with the rating agencies at different times when they've come, and this is very much reflective of different discussions we've had.
Is it fair to say, just if you zoom out entirely, that Labor wants to structurally spend more than the current government? That you believe that the state should have a larger role in the economy than it currently does?
And that's because we're bringing in a new revenue measure with the CGT.
So you do want to spend more than the current government?
It's quite clear we're at 33%. That's where we want to put our spending levels.
When you say fully rolled out of the CGT, is that actually when the policy is fully kicked in, or when the revenue is in for the first financial year?
So obviously with the CGT, revenue increases over time. That's what you see in overseas jurisdictions. So for us, we bring the legislation in, and then obviously, as the years progress, it's the way that it looks like with other jurisdictions, it does increase over time.
So that when you say that 33% of GDP, when it's fully rolled out, is that fully rolled out 5 years down the track, or what is fully rolled out?
So when the legislation is in place and you're starting to see the revenue increase.
So 3% of GDP at that point, at around 2030, is about $16.6 billion. Do you expect the CGT to be bringing in that much money at that point?
So it's over the long term. And again, the thing is we have to be practical and realistic about it. There are growing healthcare costs. There is a report just this week around the aged care sector showing that there's increased costs coming as well. We have to be realistic that these are the pressures on New Zealand, on the government books. And so we're being very open about it, that with a new revenue measure, we do have a bit more space to be able to spend.
What's the message to your potential government partners about how much policy they can expect to get through the negotiations that involves big spending?
There's one for the boss.
Yeah. My message to the other parties when we have spoken to them, and we haven't spoken to all of them, has been a pretty simple one, that voters should get the sort of government that they vote for. And if New Zealanders vote for Labor to lead the next government, this is the sort of economic management approach that we're going to be taking.
I can imagine that National's response to this will be all well and good, read the surplus targets, but Labor still has a number of things that it has promised that is still yet to fund. Are you considering any other revenue measures?
No. And we've been really clear on that. They can make up all the lies they like, and that seems to be what they're doing on a day-to-day basis at the moment. We have a simple targeted capital gains tax that we've set out the detail of how we're going to implement that. We were clear at the time that we still had a decision to make around interest deductibility that we will set out in due course. We've been clear on our position on investment boost. I don't accept that that is a new tax. I think that's just fanciful from Nicola Willis, given we're targeting extra support to small businesses. But the National Party are just desperate. Remember Nicola Willis's own fiscal rules. If she wants to lecture anybody about fiscal rules, she might want to have a look in her own backyard. She set several rules of her own and has failed to meet every one of them.
Their claim would be, they say the $18 billion hole, so if you take the $5 billion back from investment boost, that leaves you about $13 billion short. Do you accept that is the figure of where it stands?
Well, you go through the National Party's tax plans from the last election about where they were going to get new money for this and new money for that, and they weren't going to increase borrowing in order to deliver tax cuts. It was all just complete fiction. I think maybe Nicola Willis and Simeon Brown and Christopher Luxon should spend a little bit more time thinking about that.
To be clear, you said no other revenue measures. Are you no longer considering whether to cancel interest deductibility for residential property investment?
As I said, ever since we announced the capital gains tax, that's an outstanding issue that we'll resolve when we set out our fiscal plan.
Right. So that's the long cards potentially.
Well, we're going to set out our fiscal plan in due course.
The National Party's constant rhetoric is that Labor would tax more, borrow more, spend more. You have conceded today that you would need to borrow more and you would spend more, right? So you've played into 2 out of 3 of their
No, that's not true. I'm not sure where you've said that, where you've formed the conclusion that we're going to borrow more. What we've set out there is a very clear target to get
it down.
objective to get government debt down.
But you have said that you would need to pump more money, you would need to invest more, and that the public service requires more money, and that may lead to needing to borrow more in order to achieve that. You have said that today.
Well, that's not what we have said. So you're taking some words that we have not said. So that may be your interpretation. That is not what we have said.
So where is the extra money coming from to invest in the public service and to pay for the things that you have already announced?
We'll make different choices to this government. As I've said, we'll set that out in our own fiscal plan. We need to see the government's books before we do that. The government's budget has already changed pretty dramatically in the last few months, so we need to see the extent of that before we can set the detail out on that.
So you are ruling out that you would need to borrow more to pay for anything that you are going to or have already announced?
Well, the current government haven't set out the current government's borrowing trajectory, so we need to see that before we can make those sorts of commitments.
Can you say a little bit more on why you're going to the net debt measure over the core crown debt measure? Would that mean that if the government paid for it, our Auckland Harbour, another bridge over Auckland Harbour, for example, would that be an asset then on the books, so that you know that the debt that you incurred building that wouldn't be as large of a deal?
Well, that depends. So, for example, if the government goes into an agreement where, for example, a PPP, and we don't know the information around the agreement, that might actually be a liability on the government's books because of the interest payments and the payments for that yearly to the private partner as part of that PPP deal.
But is it fair to say that your change would allow more of those kind of investments to be reflected in your debt position?
Well, the major thing for us is it's an overall picture. It includes the financial assets of the government as well. It doesn't just strip out ACC because it's convenient.
Right, so if you borrow more money to build more state houses, for example, that are technically owned by KO, they would be included in this?
It would be, and depending on the way that you structure it, it is likely to be an asset because they are homes that the government owns.
Are you still comfortable with how the Social Investment Agency and the Ministry of Regulation is operating?
We've got some policy to come in both of those areas that we'll set out. I mean, that's getting a little wide of the fiscal strategy that we're announcing today, but we will set out policy. More policy around social investment. The overall approach is one that I've actually been sympathetic to, which is the idea that you calculate the long-term value of spending now in order to avoid spending further down the track. That is something that we do want to do more of. I wish this government had done more of that. They wouldn't have made some of the cuts that they've made if they were taking into account the long-term cost of those cuts.
So you're not going to scrap them?
Well, we'll set out our own plan around that in due course.
Are you any closer to deciding what you would put in the future fund?
No, that's something that we've always said, that we will wait until we're in government to get the advice on it. I haven't changed from that position.
What did you make of the analysis, I think, by Victor Consulting saying that the cost of pay equity or reinstating the pay equity scheme could be $6 billion as opposed to 11 or 12?
I mean, my initial thoughts, I have seen that report just yesterday, I briefly read it. The main thing is it shows that the analysis around pay equity was really lacking. So it did, what pay equity was the stripping of an expense item, but it didn't show the benefit to the economy by low-paid women or women that work in the economy, how much their contribution is. And so that's what that report showed. Yes, it showed that there is a net cost to it, but actually the most important thing is that these working women are more likely to spend their money in the economy because they don't have the ability to save as much. So that's the important thing around the benefit, exactly what Chippy was just talking about before.
So do you think that analysis has merit? Do you think it's likely that it would reach that level as opposed to the 11, 12 billion?
So the way that you cost the policies don't take into account the wider economic benefits. That's the way the Public Finance Act and the way that you do costings now. That is something why I believe that when we come in, as part of the wellbeing measures, as part of some of the changes to the Public Finance Act, which go with the wellbeing measures, is that we should start looking at how much is the government saving for the rest of the time because we're investing in something like this. So, for example, investing in primary health care saves $10 in the rest of the system. But that additional $10 is not accounted for. So we need to have a good, strong look at it, because then it allows for investment back into government spending and into public services that New Zealanders need.
You're not wary of the concerns that Treasury had over some of that analysis?
I mean, Treasury will always have their different views or support their views. The major thing for me is the way that things are costing. The way that things are costed, it currently doesn't take into account the benefits, and I think that's wrong.
On the Parliamentary Budget Office, last time Labor tried this in government, and eventually decided not to do it because National would come on board. Now, I understand that National are now on board, but there's a chance that you get to government and the way you design it is not a way that National would design it. Would you go ahead regardless of what the other side says about it, or would you commit to some level of unanimity on what that structure looks like?
So ideally you do want unanimity, and you want bipartisan, because we want it to be an officer of Parliament. In order to do that, it has to go through the Officers of Parliament committee. So ideally you do want broad agreement there. However, Treasury also looked at other particular options where it becomes like a unit of Treasury, for example. But the ideal option is try to get that bipartisanship, because it benefits all New Zealanders.
But do you have an overseas model that you prefer?
Yeah, so the Australian model is one that I've looked at closely. I've got a members bill that's currently in the tin that replicates the Australian model.
Just going back to your
Last couple of questions, Jo.
Adam before. So when the next have been saying around the pay equity stuff, this is the number, that has been based on the Treasury numbers. Are you saying that when you have said, oh look, we don't know whether to believe that or whether that's right, and National has basically been saying that's kind of an outrageous thing to say about Treasury and you need to have a fight with them if you got into government, are you saying that the issue that you have is that Treasury is flawed because they don't provide that extra analysis around the benefit, and that is what the wellbeing part of the budget does? Is that, I'm just trying to round the circle here.
I'm not saying Treasury is flawed. I'm saying the way the Public Finance Act doesn't recognise how investment in a certain area saves money for the rest of the time, or saves money for the government, saves money for the country. That portion is currently not required to be measured under the Public Finance Act, and yet you can see the benefits of having that information. So, for example, with the ferries, for example, like that was the cost, they stripped back the cost of that, but then it cost them billions of dollars more to do replacement ferries. So some of that cost-benefit analysis, it happens sometimes, but I think we need to have a stronger input into that space.
And what is it that, is the wellbeing budget element anything to do with that, or are you proposing through the Public Finance Act to have a greater cost-benefit analysis? Like, can you just explain that?
So the wellbeing measures have to be put in through an amendment to the Public Finance Act. So an amendment around how you cost the savings and the investment from the savings from that investment. That's something I would definitely want to work on within in government.
So what you're saying is if National had kept the wellbeing budget elements when they came out with that pay equity figure, it could have been a different figure based on the analysis measure, cost-benefit analysis measure that might have been part of the scenario. Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Yeah, so it could have. So, for example, if it showed, for example, the amount of money taken out of the economy, the lifting in child poverty, for example, statistics. I mean, there are some child poverty statistics already, but it's just a fuller understanding of how fiscal decisions impact on the well-being of New Zealanders. So for that particular example used, it'd be on working women and their families.
Mr. Hipkins,
You can have the lucky last question then.
Thank you so much. Are you going to be doing kind of public meetings that we're seeing from Chris Hipkins and Winston Peters, David Seymour, as part of your campaign?
Yeah, we'll have some public meetings as part of our campaign. I've been doing a number of invited speaking events around the country, but we'll have some of our own during the campaign as well.
So you're going to be doing similar to what the National Party leader is doing currently?
Look, they'll probably be different, but we'll have public meetings as part of our campaign, yeah.
How many, do you know how many you're going to do?
Oh, well, we'll set out a schedule. We'll let you know when we've scheduled them.
So you can come to them.
All right, thanks everybody. Cheers.
Thanks.